Clarissa's Corolla coughed into the gravel driveway like it knew it didn't belong among the polished SUVs and boxy German sedans. The late November sun dipped behind the moss-covered oaks lining the Holloway estate, casting long, threadbare shadows over the gravel. Clarice shifted the car into park and sat still for a moment. The warmth of the casserole she'd passed up earlier clung faintly to her sweater sleeves, but the chill of the evening crept through the window glass. She clutched the pie in her lap pecan with a dark brown crust, and faint imperfections wrapped tightly in a linen towel edged in hand-stitched clover. Her grandmother had sewn it decades ago. Most of the people inside had long since traded such memories for monogrammed dinner napkins and caterers who folded linens into birds. The house shimmered under the soft flicker of string lights wound around white porch columns. Its symmetry was almost theatrical. Everything curated, nothing left to chance. She stepped out her boots, crunching softly on the gravel, and crossed the yard. No one waved from the porch, though someone was visible through the front windows holding a wine glass and laughing. Inside, a woman with a name tag tapped a tablet and glanced up. Name: Clarisse Monroe. Tap. Pause. Frown. "You're not on the individual list," the woman chirped, then tilted the screen. "You're listed under the Holloway family block. Guest of family." Clarice pressed her lips together and nodded. "Once I can handwrite your badge if that's fine." A marker squeaked as it scrawled her name on a blank sticker. It was slightly crooked when pressed to her cardigan. She smoothed the edges with 2 fingers, careful not to crease the embroidery. The foyer was filled with voices, and the heavy aroma of sweet potato casserole, rosemary stuffing, and hints of vanilla candles. A child darted past. Someone called for a wine refill. Clarice moved toward the dining room, navigating between card tables draped in autumn leaves and crystal punch bowls filled with cider. She reached the kitchen island where a long table was set with labeled desserts: Dana's maple tarts, Liana's pumpkin rolls, and at the end a silver tray with her pecan pie, unlabeled, slightly off-center. No frills. Clarice placed it gently, then stepped back. Dana's voice floated from the end of the hallway. "You look so independent these days," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I could never do the whole live alone and bake thing." Clarice offered a small nod, the kind people mistake for politeness when it's really self-preservation. The dining room shimmered with effort. Twinkling fairy lights hung from the chandelier, and the tablecloth had visible creases like it had been ironed and folded too many times in one day. Clarisse found her seat tucked near the sideboard away from the main spread. The place cards had gold calligraphy, except hers, in plain black ink. Gerald's voice rose above the murmur. "Brady's got a new promotion, and they're thinking of buying that 5-bedroom off Liberty Street. Big plans. Unlike some of us who cling to their starter condos." Polite laughter rippled around the table. Clarice didn't blink. She focused on cutting the crust of her turkey, which crumbled rather than sliced. Liana leaned over slightly. "That condo of yours, it's still the one near Forsyth Park, right? Hasn't that building aged a little rough?" Clarice placed her fork down with care. "Still holds up." The napkins were folded into stiff pyramids starched to defy collapse. Clarice's had slid slightly off her lap. She reached to refold it and paused. No one noticed. No one reached. She returned the napkin to her knees slower this time, pressing the linen flat with both hands. Dessert came and went. Her pie was barely touched. Dana's tarts disappeared. A few guests commented on how cute the napkin embroidery was, assuming it belonged to someone else. By the time she stepped outside the porch, lights had dimmed to a soft pulse. She walked back to her car alone. The linen towel rested on the passenger seat, lightly scented from pecans and memory. Clarisse pulled out her phone, the glow lighting her face in the dark car. She typed, then paused. "Do you still have the property deed on file?" and pressed send. Clarissa's place card was handwritten in ballpoint pen tucked near the kitchen door, while everyone else had gold-embossed calligraphy. Sunlight streamed through the leaded glass windows of the Holloway dining room, glinting off polished silverware and crystal water goblets. Outside, the breeze tugged gently at the Spanish moss, and a cardinal chirped somewhere beyond the front porch. Inside, warmth buzzed from ovens, chatter, and the hum of carefully orchestrated performance. Clarisse entered quietly, cardigan folded over one arm, her heels barely audible on the tile. She passed the buffet spread, honey-glazed ham, deviled eggs, cornbread stuffing, and a tower of cranberry molds stacked like red translucent bricks. Someone had clipped magnolia leaves along the edges of the platters. Everything looked festive full, but Clarisse had the odd sensation of watching a movie she'd seen once long ago in a different language. Her name was missing from the seating chart in the dining room. A clipboard-wielding volunteer from Dana's church had tried to guide her elsewhere before Dana herself swept in all grace and timing. "Oh, sweetie, I thought you were going to sit by the kitchen with the cousins," she said, gesturing casually toward a folding table wedged between the swinging pantry door and a coat rack. Clarisse nodded once. The volunteer scribbled Clarisse M. in pen on a blank card and set it at the end of the plastic table. The ink smudged slightly. Clarisse sat without speaking. The dining room filled with voices layered like a choir, toasts clinked. Dishes were passed and reassigned midair. Dana glided between chairs like a seasoned maitre d', stopping just long enough at each person to appear gracious without being trapped by conversation. When everyone was seated, Dana raised her glass. On this day of thanks, she began. We gather not just to eat, but to honor the people who lift us. Families are our foundation. She looked out across the room, pausing just a beat too long when her gaze hovered near Clarisse, and then deliberately slid away. There's nothing more beautiful, Dana continued, than watching the next generation flourish. She smiled at Brady and Liana, who sat near the head table, visibly glowing in their second trimester. And what better way to show love than with space a home where a child can grow? Liana's smile froze just slightly. Brady looked down at his plate. Dana tilted her head toward Clarisse. I mean, some of us are blessed with extra rooms they never use. It would be such a gift of love, symbolic really, to pass that warmth on. A few guests tittered nervously. One older aunt nodded enthusiastically, clearly missing the undercurrent. Gerald chuckled and lifted his glass. Here's to generosity, he said loud enough to echo. Especially from those with starter condos they barely live in. Clarisse took a sip of water. The glass trembled faintly in her hand. The napkin on her lap was folded into a pyramid slightly lopsided. She refolded it into a square, pressing the crease firmly with her fingers. As dessert was being served, pumpkin pie with whipped cream, apple crumble, and Dana's prized maple pecan tarts. Clarisse's phone buzzed in her cardigan pocket. She excused herself quietly and stepped onto the back porch, where cool air wrapped around her like something alive. The screen read, Reminder Property Walkthrough, scheduled Friday at 2:00 p.m. Clarisse blinked. Her condo had no showings, not officially. The phone rang before she could fully absorb it. Kennedy's name lit up. Clarisse answered with a level voice. It's me. I thought it might be... Kennedy, said I was about to call you anyway. There's something strange on a set of filings from last week. Clarisse listened in silence, fingers tightening around the phone. It looks like your brother submitted a document listing you as co-seller. There's a buyer lined up walkthrough scheduled your condo, but you never signed. I didn't authorize anything, I know. Kennedy's voice stayed calm, but he used your name on the paperwork. That's forgery. Clarisse. From inside the house, Dana's laughter floated out like perfume, light practice disappearing into air. Clarisse didn't go back inside. She walked down the porch steps and circled toward her car. Her shoes clicked against the flagstone, the only sound she allowed herself. She stopped by the passenger door and unfolded the napkin in her hand. It was wrinkled now, the embroidered edge coming loose in one corner. She stared at it for a long second. Then she murmured low and steady, "Then let's talk about the other house. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it's in a folder, silent, stamped and signed." The rain had started sometime after dinner, steady and polite, tapping at the window panes like it was asking to be let in. Inside Clarice's condo, the light was warm and low, the kind that softened edges and made everything feel slower. The living room smelled faintly of peppermint tea and something earthy from the old bookshelf. Clarice sat cross-legged on the couch, her grandmother's cardigan draped over her shoulders, the initials EM stitched neatly along the inside collar. The cardigan had thinned over the years, but it still carried a kind of armor, quiet and woven. On the coffee table, her laptop blinked sleepily. She tapped the trackpad and the screen lit up. Kennedy had sent the folder. She opened it. There it was. Every document, every line of ownership. Her condo purchased in full with no liens, title clean. The Holloway house transferred to her name in 2013 during what Gerald had called a temporary refinancing favor. He never filed the reversal. She scrolled through signatures, scanned PDFs, closing statements. Her name was on every page that mattered. Clarice leaned back against the cushion, letting the weight of it settle in. Not anger, not victory, just clarity. She sipped her tea. It had cooled, but the mint still rose faintly from the cup. She reached for a drawer in the sideboard, the one with old receipts pens without caps and rubber bands too dry to stretch. She rummaged absently until her fingers touched a cool piece of brass. A key. A small tag dangled from the ring, faded ink just legible. Holloway. Back door. She stared at it for a moment, then set it next to the folder. A knock broke the hush. 2 short raps and a pause. Clarice didn't flinch. She wrapped the cardigan tighter and opened the door. Mrs. Carson stood on the landing, holding a small metal measuring cup. "Evening," she said, not quite smiling. "Hate to bother, but I'm short on sugar." Clarice nodded and stepped aside. "I'll grab it." Carson lingered by the door, glancing around the room without moving her head. Her eyes paused on the open folder atop the coffee table. "Well," she said quietly, "didn't think much of that condo when you moved in." Clarice looked up from the cabinet. Carson tapped her fingers against the measuring cup, then added, "Guess I was wrong." Clarice handed her a small glass jar, the lid slightly dented. "Thanks," Carson said. She hesitated before stepping out. "Rain's picking up. You take care." Clarice watched her disappear down the hallway, the echo of her soft-soled shoes fading against the tile. She turned back to the laptop. The screen had dimmed again. She woke it, logged in, scrolled through the tabs until she found the realty portal. Her cursor hovered over the list for sale button. She clicked. A confirmation window opened. She entered her password, then clicked again. A soft chime rang out from the speakers. "Sale scheduled. 7 a.m. notification to be delivered." The sheriff's cruiser didn't flash lights or sound sirens. It simply arrived like a polite storm. Across the street, Clarice sat in her car, gloved hands resting on the steering wheel. The sky was low and gray, pressing gently on the rooftops like a wool blanket pulled halfway down. Dew clung to the tips of the iron fence surrounding the Holloway estate, turning sharp edges into soft glimmers under the morning light. Inside the cruiser, the deputy adjusted his hat and stepped out with the measured pace of someone used to quiet resistance. He held a manila envelope thick with paperwork sealed with a gold sticker like a holiday card no one wanted to open. Clarice didn't move. She watched. Through the second-floor window movement, Dana's pale blue robe appeared first, then her hand lifting a porcelain teacup. Steam curled from it like a ribbon. A moment later, Gerald came into view, half-buttoned shirt, a line of sleep still drawn under his left eye. Neither of them looked at the street. They weren't expecting company. The deputy rang the bell. It echoed faintly. Not dramatic, not forced. Just present. From her parked car, Clarice could just make out the groan of the front door opening. A brief exchange of words, then silence. She opened her door. The air bit at her cheeks, the kind of clean cold that always followed a southern holiday. Trees stripped bare grass, damp breath visible. Clarisse stepped out. Her boots tapped gently on the pavement. She didn't hurry. Dana stood on the front steps, still clutching her teacup, though the steam had faded. Her robe flapped slightly in the breeze. Gerald hovered behind her. His jaw set, his knuckles white around the doorframe. The sheriff had joined the deputy, now speaking low but firm, voice carried by still air. A porch swing creaked somewhere around the side of the house. Then Dana's voice rose brittle but sugar-coated. "There must be a mistake," she said, forcing a laugh. "This can't be real. We've lived here for this is our home." The sheriff remained still. His voice was even. "You've been notified. The title is clear. This property is not in your name." Gerald stepped forward. "We helped her buy this house. It was a family arrangement." The sheriff blinked slowly. "Sir, unless you can produce documentation that overrides the current deed, this order stands." Dana looked down at the envelope in her hands as if it had changed shape. Clarice reached the gate. She didn't pause. She opened it, walked up the path, and past them without a single word. Dana's eyes widened. "You can't do this," she said, voice cracking. The sheriff turned slightly, not looking at Clarice, but watching her pass. She already did. Clarice kept walking. From an upstairs window, a curtain twitched. Across the street, Mrs. Carson stood behind her blinds, holding a mug. Her gaze met Clarice's for a moment. She didn't look away, didn't purse her lips or tilt her chin like before. This time she just watched, quiet and still. As Clarice reached the sidewalk again, she heard the sharp clatter of porcelain. Dana's teacup had slipped from her hand and shattered on the brick steps. Gerald muttered something low and angry. Behind them, Brady appeared in a hoodie, his face pale. Liana followed, barefoot, sweater half on hair, loose. Clarice didn't look back, but the voice caught her anyway. "Wait, I didn't know. Please let me explain. The internet didn't need truth. It needed a thumbnail and a caption." Clarisse watched the screen glow against the dim morning light spilling through her kitchen blinds. Her teacup sat untouched beside the laptop, curls of cinnamon steam drifting upward and curling away like smoke from an old campfire. The video had been shared by an account called @FamilyMattersSav and already had more than 3,000 views. The thumbnail froze on her face, mouth slightly open, eyes glancing off camera, taken from the exact moment she'd paused at the Thanksgiving table, surprised by Dana's ambush. The caption read, "Ungrateful daughter humiliates family over property." The clip itself was barely 40 seconds. It began with Dana's voice, sweet, smooth, coaxing. Clarice's hesitance was looped twice, followed by Gerald's toast, then a hard cut. No context, no mention of the setup or the tension already simmering beneath the roast turkey. The comments had teeth. "Must be nice to forget where you came from. I hope that condo's worth it. Cold. Just cold." Clarice sat back. The chair creaked. She didn't blink. A text from Kennedy flashed on her phone. "We can shut this down. False representation libel. Say the word." Clarice typed a single word back. "No." She closed the tab and opened her files. The cursor hovered over a folder labeled Deeds plus Proof inside, a scanned copy of the property transfer for the Holloway house. Bank statements from 2013 showing her wire of $150,000 to her parents. Emails from Dana asking for a little help with mortgage just for a few months. A notarized letter from the original title company. Clarice zipped the folder, renamed it If You Care to Know, and uploaded it to Dropbox. Then she opened her social page. No filters, no hashtags. She pasted the public link-clicked post and closed the tab. She didn't reread it. The tea had cooled. She reheated it gently and set the cup near the window where the glass caught the light. A soft saxophone note drifted from the living room. Ella Fitzgerald's voice warming the corners of the condo like sunlight. An hour passed. A message pinged Liana. "They erased you. I have proof." Clarice stared at the text. She didn't reply right away. Her thumb hovered, then lowered. The doorbell didn't ring, but she heard a soft knock. Not urgent. Familiar. Opening the door, she saw a small loaf of banana bread wrapped in wax paper. No note, just a folded cloth napkin beneath it. She glanced toward the sidewalk, but saw only the tail of Mrs. Carson's coat as it disappeared around the corner. Another text arrived. This time a photo. A page from what looked like a family scrapbook, dozens of photos pasted neatly, each labeled in Dana's precise handwriting. But something was missing. The childhood birthdays, school plays, vacations, they were all there, but Clarice wasn't cropped out or simply not included. A third message pinged Alma. "That little cafe corner's yours if you ever want to use it. Community night, book talk, or just tea." Clarice turned toward her desk. Among the circulars and utility bills, a cream-colored envelope sat, handwritten. No return address. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. The ink was dark, the signature lines neatly typed, but the 5 names scrawled below were unmistakable. "We," the undersigned, "nominate Clarice Monroe for Savannah Heritage Committee." Clarice didn't reclaim her family. She built something warmer, one teacup at a time. The cardinal landed on the windowsill just after sunrise, its feathers a bright interruption against the frosted glass. Inside the condo smelled of cinnamon and clove. A kettle hissed gently on the stove. Light from a small string of bulbs blinked softly above the kitchen archway, casting golden flickers against the trim. Clarice moved through the space with quiet rhythm, setting out mismatched mugs and 2 plates of banana muffins beside a modest ham wrapped in foil. The table runner was cotton, not lace. The centerpiece was a poinsettia wrapped in brown paper, its red leaves slightly askew. There had been no RSVP, no sign-up sheet, but the knocks had come anyway. First, a mason jar of spiced apple butter left by the Harrisons down the hall. Then a covered dish of squash casserole from Alma with a post-it. "Yours to freeze or ignore." No pressure. Someone slid a tin of ginger cookies under the door. Clarice never figured out who Mrs. Carson arrived just before 10. Cardigan buttoned unevenly and cheeks flushed from the walk. She held a small poinsettia in one hand and a folded apron in the other. "Needs a little color in here," she said, setting the plant beside the first one without ceremony. Clarice poured tea, jasmine this time, and handed over the mug without asking. The 2 women sat in a silence, neither found uncomfortable. A soft knock broke the stillness. Liana stepped in her coat, zipped halfway, cheeks pink. She held out a cream-colored envelope. Clarisse took it carefully. Inside, a baby shower invitation. Minimalist and unadorned. At the bottom, in neat, familiar handwriting. "You were always the kind one, I see it now." She nodded once and slipped the card into the drawer near the stove. Later that afternoon, Alma returned with a folded quilt and a handwritten note. Still think that corner table at the cafe could use some bookshelves. Yours to design. Clarice smiled faintly, fingers grazing the edge of the note before tucking it into her grandmother's recipe book on the shelf. By mid-afternoon, the condo had a hum to it, quiet, layered. Jazz played from the living room. Ella again. A red scarf hung by the door, drying from the drizzle outside. Someone had left a cinnamon-scented candle near the radiator. The window fogged slightly as the kettle steamed for another round. On the table sat a small parcel Clarice had set aside until the house fell still again. She opened it now. Inside a frame, behind the glass, the napkin smoothed pressed. No longer creased. Beside it, a photo. Clarice, age 8, pigtails uneven, missing one front tooth. She held a science trophy nearly the size of her torso, grinning beneath the crooked banner volcano experiment. First place. Her breath caught, but only for a moment. The phone rang. A soft voice introduced herself from the Savannah Historical Society. "We've reviewed your nomination," she said. "Your home and your story have been selected for preservation in the December issue." Clarice didn't answer right away. She looked at the frame again, then toward the window where the cardinal still sat. That evening, she lit a small candle near the sill. The wick crackled once, then held steady. Mrs. Carson, who'd stepped out and returned with a paper bag of pears, paused beside her. She looked at the flickering light, then at Clarice. "Think we're ready to host the Christmas potluck?" Clarice nodded. "We already are." The warmth in Clarice's condo didn't come from holiday candles or casseroles, but from quiet gestures, banana bread on the porch, mismatched mugs on the table, and a framed napkin no one thought to preserve but her. Sometimes the people we expect the least from carry the most grace, and those once overlooked become the ones who hold the community together, like a porch light left on for someone coming home late. Kindness doesn't demand attention, it simply waits shining. If this story stirred something in you, maybe it's time to notice the quiet strength around you, or offer a little of your own.